There's something very powerful that you should know about eating matzah. Eating matzah with the right intent can activate hashgacha in your life daily. And it can put you in the role of a prophet, someone who represents Hashem and speaks for Hashem. And you could say thinks for Hashem on this earth. And here's how. What is matzah all about? Matzah is the bread of affliction, the bread of suffering, the bread of poverty. Which means, and if you want the background for this, you have to look at my Sefer, Mishnas Yaakov, where I explain this. I'm just going to present to you the meaning without all the background. Which means that matzah represents the fact that we are, on the one hand, eating bread and filling ourselves up. But on the other hand, we are at the same time aware of the fact that we can just as well be hungry. Lechem Oini, the bread of suffering, is the bread that, being so simple, reminds us of hunger. So it's a food that we can't eat without realizing that we can just as well be hungry as we are becoming full. And this way, this bread, the lechem oni, the bread of affliction, is the very appropriate bread to commemorate, to symbolize, leaving Egypt and going to Eretz Yisrael, because Eretz Yisrael is the land where, the Torah tells us, we have to earn the rain from heaven by doing good. It says in Sefer Dvarim, we say it twice a day. If you listen to the mitzvahs, then Hashem will make it rain. If you don't listen to the mitzvahs, Hashem will hold back the heavens from giving their rain. Okay. Eretz Yisrael is a place where it may or may not rain, depending if we earn it, and therefore the bread of Eretz Yisrael, which is what we get when it rains, cannot help but remind us of the hunger of Eretz Yisrael, the possibility of not having bread, because in Eretz Yisrael there's this precarious state of you may or may not have your bread. So having a bread that's right there on the liminal place of between satiety and hunger, that's what the matzah is. On a deeper level, this idea of if you listen to the mitzvahs, it will rain, and if not, not. On a deeper level, what that means is every good that we have in this world is contingent. And by that I mean to say, nothing is taken for granted. There's always a possibility of lack. You have food, you could also not have food. You have health, you could also not have health. And everything that you benefit, everything that you enjoy, also contains within it the possibility of its lack. And that gives rise to the concept of schar v'einish, of reward and punishment. Because if every time you enjoy something, every time there's some good, there's also the possibility of its lack. So then there's always the question, well, why do I have good instead of not having good? Right? Why do I have the food instead of not having the food? It becomes a very interesting question. If there wouldn't be a possibility of lack, or a possibility of suffering, then it would be meaningless to ask that question. But given that there is a possibility of lack, one can always ask themselves, why? Why, given that there's a possibility of lacking, do I, in fact, not lack? What, or put into very crude terms, what did I do to deserve this? And that's the root of schar v'einish, reward and punishment. Nothing is absolute. Everything has alternatives. There's always a possibility. In every good, there's a possibility of evil. So then, what explains? Now, being moral beings, being human beings who consider morals, and being believers in the morality of the universe, we will explain what we experience, and we should explain what we experience, based on reward and punishment. Do we deserve this? Okay? And this gets us to the point I want to explain. The powerful, explosive idea that you have a method of activating Hashgacha Pratis, activating divine providence in your life, and activating this blessing, or this kind of way of life, described in that parasha of Hayim Shemai. If you listen to Hashem, it will rain. And if you don't listen to Hashem, the rains will stop, the heavens will stop. I want to explain to you how you do that, and how you do that by eating matzah. And not just eating matzah, but you can do that all the time. Matzah symbolizes it. Again, matzah means, or matzah is supposed to remind you, supposed to make you think of the fact that I am eating on the one hand, but I could just as well be hungry. And matzah forces you to say, well, why did I deserve this? And now here's what I want you to imagine. Imagine that every good you have, whether it's food, whether it's clothing, whether it's family, any pleasure that you partake of, you will first ask yourself, do I deserve this? And why do I deserve this? Now, you might be thinking, and you'd be right, that this is a dangerous exercise because you're going to start judging your stuff and you're going to start feeling guilty. And it is a dangerous exercise. And in order to do this exercise properly, you really must, number one, be a good person. But I should say that's number two. Number one is you have to have a good sense of what is appropriate. And in order to have a good sense of what's appropriate, you have to be a person of good character. Number two, you have to be a good person so that you can find that you in fact do deserve good things. Otherwise you might starve yourself to death. But now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Imagine this, okay? You sit down and you eat. And before you eat, you say, here's the food. Some people are hungry. Some people starve to death. Do I deserve this food? Why should you leave the question to God? Here's my point. You don't have to leave the question. You don't have to leave this decision. You don't have to leave this thought process to God. You could think for God. And this is why I said you sort of become like a Navi. If you think in the most moral terms and you start questioning, do I deserve it or not? You are activating divine providence. And here's how. Okay? Do I deserve the food? Yes, I do because X, Y, Z. No, I don't because of some other reason. Okay, well then you're going to rectify that, right? You want to deserve good. You want to deserve pleasure. This, I maintain, is going to activate divine providence. God is going to start withholding the heaven from you and making it not rain by you doing this exercise, and I'm going to show you how. Shamayim, the word for heaven, God is going to withhold the rain from the heaven. Shamayim comes from sham, there. So the Vilna Gaon says that the heaven is what's there. What does that mean it's there? It means it's the realm that we are not familiar with. It's the unknown. It's the beyond. Okay? Now going back to my imagined, that you should be you, doing this exercise of constantly engaging in this kind of metric, in this kind of judgment, this reward and punishment kind of judgment. Do I deserve this or not? Let's take that to work. Someone enters into a business enterprise, or he has a job. Should I get paid? Do I deserve to get paid? Should this business venture succeed? Well, that's a very interesting question, right? Because should this business venture succeed, that forces you to start thinking about the most important moral judgments. That forces you to think about whether what you're engaged in is truly good, or perhaps you're just being selfish. Perhaps you just want to make money and you don't deserve it. So now you're going to be confronting the most important fundamental moral questions in life. Am I contributing to the good? Am I doing what's right? These are the questions that, if you want to be a complete person who's engaged in the absolute good, these are the kinds of questions you want to be asking yourself, right? So you're going to be asking yourself these questions, and you're going to be constantly judging yourself. We're literally judging yourself. You won't allow yourself to have a pleasure. And I mean this, you can do this if you have the guts to do so, and if you're willing to really start thinking. You can do this. You can say, I don't want to have this pleasure because I don't think I deserve it, and I think I deserve this too. And again, I want to reiterate this. You better have a very robust philosophy, a very robust idea of what people deserve. It becomes so much important. And maybe you should develop that before you do this, and we can talk about that. We will talk about it. I do talk about that. That's sort of fundamental for this. But if you do have that robust philosophy, you should start thinking about it. When do I deserve what? And I maintain now that this is going to cause something to happen in the heaven. Why? Because the heaven is what's there, is what's beyond. It's what's unknown. And you know what's unknown? Besides for what we call the sky or the heavens, which maybe now is sort of known, because we sort of know what makes it rain. But you know what's really unknown? The subconscious, things in our mind, things in our psyche that we can't manipulate and that manipulate us. That's the shamayim, that's sham, that's out there. And what's going to happen if you start thinking about only partaking in the good, if it's earned, what's going to happen is you might, let's say, have an opportunity to make a lot of money, but you won't find it within you to engage in that opportunity if it's not morally sound. And right there, when that happens, so again, we have a person who's constantly thinking about, I only want schar, I only want reward, meaning I don't want to receive benefit unless it's earned. I don't like unearned things. I want schar v'oinish, reward and punishment. I want to get what I deserve. That person, what he's doing is he's linking his own selfish benefit with the greater good, with the absolute good, with God's good. Which means he won't do things for his own benefit unless they comport with God's good. Where do the heavens come in? Because if there is something that might give him benefit, but it doesn't quite match with the greater good, because maybe he's not all there, he won't find himself motivated to engage in that. He literally will be unable to make money till he works himself out and finds the good perfectly. So what the pasuk is saying is, if you activate this kind of parsha, if you read this parsha twice and you think about it and you live it with the symbolism of the matzah, you're going to change your own nature. You're going to change your own experience, because if you really commit to this idea that I don't want something that I don't deserve, if you really commit to that and you start living that way, then if you try to engage in something which is not perfect, it won't succeed. Your shamayim, your spiritual there, that which is beyond and unknown, won't work for you. Which is another way of saying that is that God is not working for you. Because you, and this isn't whatever you could control, the part of you that you control, you can do whatever you want. But that's really just the part of you that you control is a really small fraction of what determines your success or failure. So much more of it is the shamayim, is what's beyond. And by activating this kind of thinking, what you're doing is you're aligning the shamayim, you're aligning the sham, the out there, with your own experience. And that out there is really right up here in here. But it's unknown, so it's there. Okay? So basically you're manipulating your subconscious and making it start working for God. Make it start working in a way that if you engage in something that is not appropriate, something where you shouldn't succeed, you won't find it within you. You won't find within you the ability to succeed. And by doing that, I say you are, now I want to go back to the point I started, you're activating divine providence. Because basically you're aligning your own success and failure, and your own ability to succeed or fail, with what is the most true in God's eyes. And that's represented by your shamayim, your subconscious, which is out there. And you want it to work for God. You want it to work on you for God. And you're activating it by engaging in this kind of thinking. And I also said that you're like a prophet. You're like God's emissary on earth, because you're basically doing exactly what God does. God withholds the heavens, and he gave us the key to withholding the heaven within us, or activating the heaven that's within us. That shamayim, which is there, which is our unknown, the unknown part of our psyche, which has so much power over us. If you want that to work for God, you can do that. You can make that happen. So that is the power of the matzah, okay? So the eating of the matzah symbolizes this whole idea of maybe I do have bread, maybe I don't have bread. And the prophets would eat matzah, and really they would do everything the same way. While they eat, they tell themselves, hey, I'm eating, but I could also be hungry. So there has to be a reason why I'm eating. And that reason should be linked with the absolute moral good. And if you live that way, then you'll find that your actions are determined by the absolute good. And you won't have the ability to enjoy this world without it being deserved. And by the way, you won't want that ability. Because if you can actually expand yourself to live at this level, where you're really, like I said, representing God, and you're really living in a way that your every action is part of a cosmic purpose and sense, then you're going to appreciate that more than having that bread, that unearned bread. That is the power of the matzah. And this is why matzah is so central. You see, it's not something we only do on Pesach, it's also in the tefillin, in the parashas of tefillin. There's the mitzvah of matzah, which basically means we're supposed to think about matzah every day. It's part of what we tie to our hands and put between our eyes. So it's a very fundamental idea. And it connects to that parasha, which we say twice a day. The parasha of Ahim Shemaya, the parasha of reward and punishment. And by eating the matzah, we can activate the heaven, we can activate the Shemayim that is there, dwelling within ourselves. We can activate the Hashras Hashchina, the dwelling of Hashem's presence, or the divine providence, which, the conduit of which is this Shemayim that is right there within our very souls. Wishing you all a wonderful, kosher Yom Tov.